and welcome back to another player analysis show. I'm your host, Haider, Rubbani, and I'm joined by a great friend of the show, Pandey, who is the chief writer for the Italian news outlet. Kos, it's great to have you back. We're going to do a series of shows today. Let's call it a series of shows because I think what's really important is that United have been linked with a lot of players, and I think United are being linked with players, different types of players who are different profiles, and we kind of sit here thinking, how are they going to fit into Ten Hag's system? What is Ten Hag actually going to do? Is he going to stray away from maybe some of the possession-based principles that we saw him at Ajax? So in this first episode, we will talk about Mason Mount because he is a player that Man United are very, very heavily linked with. They have agreed personal terms at the stage that we're recording this show. So welcome back to the show. And what do you think United actually need from a player in midfield? Because we spoke about Frankie de Jong at length last summer, and he's a player that I think Manchester United, I would have liked to see them go back in for, someone that can control the tempo of a game, which United struggle to do, someone that's able to carry the ball as well. He's a great progressive ball carrier, and a player that just understands Ten Hag's system. But when you look at Mason Mount on paper, he maybe doesn't offer those on-the-ball qualities in terms of, let's say, control. But there is actually a really good reason why Ten Hag is targeting a player like Mason Mount.
Yeah, I mean, it's a bit weird because I think the last time I was on the podcast, we were talking about something similar to all of that. I mean, United's midfield issues and all of that. So says a lot about United, but here we are. But I think United still need that number 8 who can control play, because as much as all United fans are massive fans of Casemiro and what he offers on the ball or off the ball with his, I mean, whatever he did for that goal he scored, about a goal he created about a week ago, and his off the ball attributes, I think he's still not a tempo dictator. He's not great at playing out of the press. And we've seen that. We've seen that in massive games. We saw that in the Liverpool loss. We saw that in the Barcelona away game where he was too casual while turning. He couldn't play through the press when 3 men were right behind him. And Liverpool constantly, fed on that. So I think there's a need for, I mean, I don't think Casemiro is someone who should be sold because it's been one season. It would probably be a case of him rotating with another number 6. Or secondly, the one way we can fix the problem is to play Casemiro there and make sure that you have a number 8 beside him who can offer what Casemiro doesn't offer. And that is why I still think that Frankie de Jong is the perfect sort of option in that number 8 role, but that's not happening because that guy doesn't want to leave. He seems to hate United for some reason at this point. And I think a lot of United fans also hate him back. For some reason, they're reciprocating all of that. But I think Mount, when it comes to Mount, I don't think Mount's that, I mean, you mentioned that Mount's not that number 8 who plays through the press. He's not someone who operates deep. He's more of that number 8 who's much more, thrives much more in an advanced role, which is sort of what he did at Chelsea. But Chelsea under Thomas Tuchel played 2 number 10s. And they had loads of control in possession as well because they were really structured side in and out of possession. They could stifle teams out of possession while playing a high defensive line. I mean, people criticize Thomas Tuchel for being pragmatic, but the way he structured his team made sure that they were pragmatic while being either in a mid block or a higher block. And in that role, Mount could always operate in the final third or roundabouts the final third. And I think that is Mount's favorite role. That is where I see him fitting into as a United player. But again, as you mentioned, we have too many profiles there, and Mount is someone who brings in something fresh in terms of what currently United have in their squad. Because you look at Marcel Sabitzer, I think he's more of a receiver, which reminds us of Donny van de Beek. I mean, he offers more than Donny van de Beek, but they're both receiver first players who like to receive the ball between the lines and then dictate play from there. We know what Bruno Fernandes is. He can pretty much do a lot of things. And we just spoke about Casemiro. I think Scott McTominay is another one who's a final third midfielder. And Fred, he's still a mystery 4-5 years on. He's a box-to-box midfielder who comes up with Lionel Messi stuff sometimes. But I think that's where Mount is someone who's fairly different, where he's an extremely good progressive passer as well. And he's a fairly good receiver who receives in the left side. And I think if you look at a lot of what Mount did during the better days at Chelsea under Thomas Tuchel, um, he was constantly operating in the half spaces. And I think he's a left-sided player who's also done a similar sort of role on the right side in the right half space. So I think as much as we are saying that Mount might not be the perfect signing for United, I think if he operates on the right um, in a slightly advanced number 8 role, I think that's going to help Anthony a lot. Because as much as I've seen a lot of criticism for Anthony, but I don't think he's been too bad. I think if you constantly compare him to the price tag, at least, I mean, if it's just been 10 months since he's arrived at the club and arrived in the city, by the way, there's a problem because I think you compare a player to the price tag about 2-3 seasons on. Once the system is there, once there's a system in place and there's a structure there which complements the profile of that player, that helps the strength of the player come to the fore. And that's slowly happening. And we've seen his performances improve. But I still think that Anthony can do a fair bit more with a right-sided creator. Because as much as Anthony's, I think, expected assist tally is as good as Bukayo Saka's, I think it will go up if United sign a player who can operate on the right in the half spaces. Because we see Aaron Wan-Bissaka doing that or Diego Dallo doing that, making those underlaps instead of those overlaps. I think if Mason Mount comes in, Anthony's going to get a lot more options for a link up on that side and to, pretty much create more. So I think if United end up using Mount in that role, which I think is what Eric Ten Hag wants at this point when it comes to a need for a secondary midfielder, I think that's going to make a fair bit of sense because you look at United being linked with Adrian Rabiot as well. He's more of a left-sided option. And I think Bruno Fernandes is a very left-sided option as well. So I think signing Mount, and I'm not talking about the fee yet because the fee is a completely different discussion altogether. On paper, signing Mason Mount for that right-sided role to make sure that he operates in that half space or close to that half space in the final third, that's going to make a fair bit of sense. Again, not talking about the transfer work.
A lot to unpack there, Carl. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring up a slide. So if you listen to this, obviously on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, get yourself to YouTube, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, and watch it here so you can see our beautiful faces. So this is actually from Mason Mount. So some really interesting things. I want to actually break down some of the things you spoke about, especially about Anthony, and I actually want to talk about some other elements which Ten Hag could add to the side, namely at right centre back, because I think that if you're bringing Mount in, someone who's a good progressive passer, but like you said, he likes to operate a little bit higher up. So I think United might go with 2-8s. So Bruno and Mount could play as 2-8s with Casemiro. I think, well, you don't have that Frankie de Jong profile. What United will then have to do is sign someone like Kim, who's so comfortable at stepping out of possession on that right-hand side. So I love Rafa Varane. I think he's world-class in terms of his defending. He's great at defending spaces. He's absolutely incredible at that. He's a leader at the back. But you've got to manage his minutes, unfortunately. Someone like Kim who likes to be proactive on the front foot. And guys, if you haven't seen the show I did with Joe Fischetti, make sure you check that out on Kim. But something that Kim is brilliant at is stepping in the midfield and playing those progressive passes. So if you have Mount further up and you have both Lisandro and you have Kim both stepping forward and be able to offer United some incredible ability to break through the lines, then to players like Mount, to players like Bruno, I think United are going to be a really difficult team to play. And that also makes up for Casemiro's, let's say, I don't want to say he's not great on the ball, but when in tight spaces, he can sometimes give the ball away, as you mentioned. But let's go back to this graphic here. So this is from Mason Mount's own mouth. He said, I like to work from box to box, help out defensively, but also get forward to score and assist goals for the team. That's where I think my strengths are. I'm versatile, so I can adapt and play higher up or a lot deeper. For me in this day and age, certainly being able to play different positions is so key. You see formations change even during games, and you can play 2 or 3 different roles in a game. I think I'm a traditional midfielder, even though I can play a number of roles for the team. Mason Mount said this about his position. I've always said that I'm best as a number 8. I've played there since I was a young kid. So what are your thoughts on this? Because I think United will try and play a bit more of a 4-3-3. They played a bit of 4-5-1 quite a lot this year, obviously. Eriksen has done a really good job. I think what Eriksen, well, look, firstly, the age profile. I'd also like to maybe see Eriksen play number 10 at times. I think that's where United are missing some of those fantastic creativity and killer passes. Bruno can shift that to the right, but I still think Bruno's obviously the first choice number 10. But you've got to have options of rotation. The drop-off from Bruno to Eriksen is not as big as, say, from Bruno to I don't know, let's say Fred in that position, which we've seen a few times. United need to get to that level of quality where you've got two quality players in each position. So when you're looking at this and you're thinking, okay, Mason Mount coming into the midfield for Manchester United, wanting to play that number 8 role, and you have mentioned though he likes to operate in the half spaces, which suggests that he likes to play as number 10. He's good at that. But actually, with United, a lot under Ten Hag this year playing a lot of counter pressing in midfield, he is perfect for that, right? He's perfect. He offers you energy, offers you legs. He's tenacious. And when you look at the signings that Ten Hag has actually signed, so you think of Lisandro Martinez, you think of Casemiro, you think of Malacia, all players that are aggressive, like defend on the front foot, have the legs, to play this pressing system. But when you look at the personalities as well that Ten Hag's bringing into the team, the personalities, they're players that are leaders. I think Mason Mount is a leader at Chelsea. I am still quite surprised they're looking to get rid of him when you're looking at some of the players they've signed. But when you look at the profile as well, a lot of these players I mentioned, aggressiveness, powerful, maybe I'd say maybe pacey as well to a certain extent. So is Ten Hag almost building a side that's closer to Jurgen Klopp's Liverpool? More of the counter pressing, the aggressive, the front foot, winning the ball back quickly and scoring and blowing teams away, rather than, let's say, going towards what Pep Guardiola does and City are an amazing pressing side, but they almost pass you to death. They're so good in possession. They're so good technically in tight spaces. And while Mason Mount's a good technical player, I don't think he's on the level of someone like Bernardo. So does this actually suggest with these signs, you've seen United linked with Declan Rice, Harry Kane's world class, obviously. Rasmus Højlund will be on episode 2 that we're doing together. These players are like they're tenacious, they're powerful, they're good, they're still very good technically. Harry Kane's one of the best, but it's almost like United are building a powerful and explosive side, not just a possession-based, let's say, cute and let's say a side full of control and ball players. I think you understand where I'm going with this in this question.
Yeah, I think more than anything, it's also about raising the technical flooring of that side, because even this season, there were instances where United were constantly trying to play on the break, which Erik Ten Hag criticized after the Chelsea game, where United did score 4, but Ten Hag was constantly talking about control. And Ten Hag's obviously, ever since he's joined the club in his very first press conference, he was constantly focusing on that word, the idea of control. And I think to have control on the pitch, you need to have more technically proficient players, which I think United are going towards. And I think Mount fits into that. And I think I'm not sure about the technical ceiling, but I think Casey Evans pretty much nailed it on Twitter, saying that he increases the technical flooring of the United side, but he doesn't exactly secure the technical ceiling of that side.
That was a great tweet. I saw that today.
Yeah, I perfectly agree with that. And also the fact that Mount himself points out that he's incredibly versatile. And we've seen that under Thomas Tuchel. Not after Thomas Tuchel because Chelsea fell off. But I think if you look at another one of Ten Hag's principles is the idea of occupying the final third, is to at least have a 4v4 in the final third, or at least a numerical advantage in the final third. So if the opposition is playing a back 4, you pin your front 5 to them or your front 4 to them. And a player like Mount does that perfectly, because he, as we've been talking about, that he's great at occupying that half space. And when a player does that, Erik Ten Hag is definitely going to be a massive fan of him. And about a couple of seasons ago, Mount used to be one of the best pressers across the top 5 European leagues, which is again a fairly useful skill set to have. And I don't think too many United players have that. And as much as Bruno is great at pressing off the ball, I think Mount is someone who's matured in terms of pressing. Bruno's obviously matured as a presser as
well. Would you say a smarter presser?
Yeah, that's what I mean. Bruno's always been that energetic presser off the ball, but it's only this season that he's actually matured as a smart presser, as you just mentioned. I think Mount comes in as someone who's already, matured as a smart presser. And I'm not saying that Mount's a better footballer than Bruno Fernandes. They're completely different players. But one issue that we constantly still have with Bruno is that he doesn't hold on to the ball as much as we would actually like. And Mount is someone who actually holds on to the ball much more than Bruno can. And I think there was a time there was a phase this season where people actually wanted Christian Eriksen to play at 10 before he got injured. And the reason for that was largely that Bruno is, very hurried in possession, whereas Eriksen, someone who's always been, much more controlled, which allows him to which allows him to play a lot deeper in midfield as well. So I think it's a similar case for Mason Mount, where he's someone who doesn't just raise a technical flooring of the side. He can help United control games more, be it, behind the lines or between the lines, or, just pretty much being there, controlling games. I think that's important because I just mentioned Ten Hag wants control in the side, regardless of what happens. When we have a lot of players in that side, and that starts from the goalkeeper, by the way. I mean, we can talk about
that so much. I agree.
Being there. We can talk about
we are not going to
Lisandro Martinez.
Yeah. We're not going to talk about David here, but yeah,
we have a goalkeeper there who can't sustain possession whatsoever. And as soon as the team presses him, he boots it out of play, which managers like Erik ten Hag and even Roberto De Zerbi himself have been very vocal that De Zerbi nailed it in an interview back in Italy, saying that you're essentially gambling if you're playing those long balls out. And that's what United are doing, and that's what they shouldn't be doing. And I think that's what Ten Hag wants to improve and wants to, that's an issue that Ten Hag wants to tide over. I think that's why United do have to sign a new goalkeeper to control play more than anything. I mean, even if, Mount fits into that side, I think there needs to be more control behind him to make sure that he operates in the final third more. Because if there's limited control behind him, he would constantly have to come deeper to conduct possession as well. And I think having a new centre back there, because we're massive fans of Rafael Varane, but he's not great in possession. He's an excellent box defender, which Kim Min-jae himself is. But Kim is levels above Varane when it comes to his on-the-ball abilities. And if, say, Kim comes in and United somehow get a new goalkeeper who can actually keep possession and conduct possession, I think that's going to help someone like Mount a lot. Because if that doesn't happen, we're essentially wasting Mount in a deeper role, where even though he's a great progressive passer, but I don't think he's someone whose long-term future at United would lie in that role. So there's surgery required behind him to make sure that Mount actually plays in his preferred role, or where he actually plays at his best.
Yeah, absolutely. And this segues beautifully, Carlos, now onto some of the key statistics from FBref. So when we look at some of the strengths, you look at the tackles he's winning per 90, he's in the 88th percentile. No surprises at all, really, or the attempted tackles, And then you look also at the tackles, especially in the mid third, which is huge. And this is where we expect him to play, right? If he comes in more as a number 8, 93rd percentile. And then I would say that this is such a key part of what Ten Hag wants. And maybe this is what Eriksen is lacking. I think Christian Eriksen is a beautiful footballer. We're both massive fans. When he was at Spurs, especially under Pochettino, he was one of my favorite players. He created the most chances to Handy along with Mesut Ozil over a 5-6 year period. Really creative. What I've liked and what we missed from him when he was injured was that control in midfield, especially when you look at Casemiro having to do that role, and it doesn't play to his strengths. I still think Casemiro is sensational, but I think United should look at a player that allows Casemiro to be managed as well, because he is hitting 30, but he's a sensational player, and I'm a huge fan of his. But you have to understand as well there are limitations, and when Casemiro was playing, let's say next to Sabitzer or even next to Bruno, I think we saw a player that struggled a little bit more. Whereas when he was next to Eriksen, and Eriksen was given that duty to, for example, control the tempo of the game, get onto the ball and play those passes through the lines to Bruno. I think we saw a better Casemiro. So while Eriksen can do that, I think off the ball he looked pretty decent in the last few games, especially that Bournemouth game. You saw how many tackles he made and how many interceptions. So he has improved, but I don't think he has the industry, maybe the engine, the energy. And that's why sometimes when Fred plays in that position, United actually look like a more solid side. But what you're getting with Mount is you're getting a little bit of both. So those are some of the defensive ones. Do you have any comment on that as well? Do the stats kind of match up, in your opinion, to the eye test when you look at Mason Mount? I mean, I always thought of him as an absolute pressing machine, a very intelligent presser, but also a very effective tackler. And when you look at those tackles in the mid-third, 93rd percentile, I mean, that's up there with the best in Europe. And I think he, from an off-the-ball perspective, this is why I think a lot of United fans just look at him thinking English name, Brexit FC, all this rubbish. But actually, I think he's a very, very good footballer whose stock is low after a very poor season at Chelsea. But he could be a very good system player within what Ten Hag is trying to do.
Yeah, I think we pretty much touched upon it about some minutes ago that United have too many different profiles in there, which makes Ten Hag's job fairly difficult because he needs to come up with systems to, make sure that those players play at their strengths, and that system doesn't expose their weaknesses. And United have too many players who can't actually fit into the system that Ten Hag's trying to build, and that includes, players like Scott McTominay, players like Fred, and to an extent, even someone like Christian Eriksen. I mean, he used to be my favorite player when he was at Tottenham. I mean, favorite player across Europe when he was at Tottenham. But I don't think he's someone who. I mean, we pretty much saw it in the last game I think in the last two games where Ten Hag was actually talked to him on the touchline saying that you need to be quicker off the ball and you need to cover those spaces as well. So I think Mount does that, and I think he fits into the system, which can't exactly be said for a lot of players in that United side. But again, it's about what United do behind him and how they fix the issues behind him. And when it comes to the stats we're looking at, he's always been, and he mentioned that in his quotes as well, where he's extremely active off the ball, where, he can be a box-to-box entity, but his best comes in the final third. But when asked of him to do the dirty job, he's always been up for it. And it's like a lot of people compare him to Frank Lampard, and to an extent, I do think that those comparisons are true because he's got that late runs into the box. And when it comes to those late runs in the box, United don't have a player who does that. So to a large extent, United also had a goal scorer to that team, which is a team that needs goal scorers because we know what's going on. I mean, we've got Wout Weghorst who doesn't score, and we've got Anthony Martial who's made of leaves. He's not even made of ice or whatever. Now he's made of leaves. So, I mean, I think Mount is someone who would add a lot of goals to that team, and that's something which is another asset that we are adding to the side. But again, as we mentioned, it's a lot of it is down to whether United can control games when he's, operating in the final third or roundabouts.
So the final part of the show, Kaustubh, we'll talk about it now. And what I want to talk about is how, we spoke about Mount's, what do United need? We've spoken about what his strengths and weaknesses are. We spoke about his off-the-ball quality, as you can see the graphic that we spoke about earlier. So, and we spoke about him against, or how he stacks up against United's other options, let's say like Christian Eriksen. So what is he going to offer then in terms of the wide players? Because you've mentioned Anthony already, so I want to delve into a bit more. We saw Jadon Sancho play more on the right-hand side, and I think he was honestly a revelation. Everyone that watches this show and anyone that knows me knows I'm a massive Jadon Sancho fan. I think his potential ceiling is higher than nearly anyone else in this squad. I think he can be that good. One of the problems is that, like you mentioned, United need better technical players in the team. Players that are more technically secure. We've seen that. United played against Brighton in the semi-final of the FA Cup. Brighton had a team with much, much higher technical ability and security on the ball than United, and that shouldn't really be the case. Jadon Sancho suffered by not having players that he can sort of play quick 1-2s that he can combine with, and runners as well. So you've mentioned one of Mason Mount's best qualities is making those runs, and playing almost that number 10 position, but making those runs in the box, much like Frank Lampard. How much of a bonus will that be for a player like Jadon Sancho? And if we're going to look at someone like Harry Kane, I mean, Harry Kane is a sensational footballer. I don't care what age he is. He's sensational. If United sign him and these other pieces, they have a title-winning squad, in my opinion. and they should be going for the title. I know Pep Guardiola is supremely good, but I think United have all the tools then to challenge. But when you have a look at Harry Kane's ability to drop deep and to play those passes, Bruno is going to have a great time, making those third man runs. But Mason Mount really excels in this. So with Jadon Sancho, let's say on the right hand side, he's going to love Mason Mount, isn't he, in terms of the runs he makes and just quick combinations. But whoever's playing number 9 as well will really like a player that's times his runs perfectly into the box. So while he is going to probably play in that number 8 position off United, a lot of quality on the ball progression, industry as well, great pressing, but actually he'll offer a goal threat and help those wide players who have struggled without that movement in front of them, I think.
Yeah, I think when it comes to Mason Mount combining with Jadon Sancho, I think when Sancho arrived and United had Donny van de Beek playing when it comes to coming off the bench and playing 10 minutes whenever he used to, fans were actually excited to watch them link up. But since we pretty much know that Van de Beek probably doesn't have a future at the club anymore, and the fact that Marcel Sabitzer is also probably going back to Bayern Munich, and there's a lesser chance of him returning to United on a permanent basis. I think Mount is someone who can actually play regularly, firstly, and then combine with Jadon Sancho a fair bit because they know each other from their time together with the national team. And the fact that Sancho is someone who I still believe that he's not a wide player. When it comes to speaking about wide players, we currently look at someone like Alejandro Garnacho, because he's someone who, as soon as he comes on, you look at him taking players on, beating them on the touchline, going past them, supplying the final pass inside. Sancho has not done that. And Sancho is someone who thrives when he has runners around him, when he has players around him to combine with, almost like because he's a street footballer. And street footballers play in these shorter spaces where they don't dribble as much. But when they combine, they take these 1 or 2 touches to kill the opposition defenders off. And Mount is someone who's constantly done that at Chelsea and the national team. And he's done that on both sides. But I think the dilemma which comes in when it comes to Sancho is that if he plays out wide and United are operating with Mount and Bruno Fernandes there, United won't have a player to go out on the touchline and beat players 1v1 to supply the final pass. They'll have to be fairly central focused. So that's going to require a different setup for them to thrive on, because you look at someone like Antony, where Antony can actually drag defenders wide. And he can go past the defender, although he doesn't do that too often, but he's someone who's improving in that regard. But what United fans expect out of Antony suits the current system when it comes to Mount playing in that, as compared to where Jadon Sancho is. Although I want to see them link up, because that's going to be something I look forward to when Van de Beek arrives as well. And it's going to be fairly attractive on the eye, but United will have to make a sort of a change to the system where they might have to make sure that the left fullback, or whichever side they're playing on, is advancing fair more on the wide space, not inside, because there's going to be Sancho there operating slightly inside and Mount operating slightly inside as well. So, and the centre forward there occupying a centre back and occupying the back line. So I think that's going to be a dilemma. But as we've just spoken about, Ten Hag's great at finding these solutions on the pitch, and that is something Ten Hag's done throughout the season, which is why I think Ten Hag is probably one of the best managers across Europe, where you give him a certain profile, and he can come up with a system or an approach which suits him and brings the best out of the team and the other players around him, which is what he did for a fair while with Wout Weghorst, despite the fact that he wasn't scoring goals. And that actually helped David De Gea as well. When Weghorst dropped deep and De Gea's goal kicks actually made a fair amount of sense, despite the fact that United didn't have control of possession. So I think it all depends on how the system changes if Mount and Sancho are playing together. And a lot of us United fans actually want Sancho to do well. But again, it requires a fair amount of change in that side for the team to operate on the basis of how he wants it to be, on the basis of its strengths. And Mount will do that. Mount will certainly helped Sancho in terms of having more players in the final third around him instead of him being isolated just like he was last season against Atletico Madrid away from home, which is probably the most frustrating Sancho performance I've seen. But again, that was not down to him. That was down to the system because he had Alex Telles at left back. And Telles was rather poor at making those overlaps down the side. So United would need the left-sided fullback to make those runs down the white spaces as well. And I think Ten Hag will recognize that as time goes on.
Absolutely. And guys, that's the end of the first show on the 3-part series that I'm doing with Kaus. And today we obviously spoke about Mason Mount. Make sure you hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, give Kaus a follow as well on Twitter. His details will be in the description below. And we'll see you all next time.